Well, how are you?
Good.
Welcome. Where are you from?
Mississippi.
You grew?
Yes, our name is Chapel Hart.
Okay.
Chapel Hart stepped onto America's Got Talent as complete unknowns and walked away as one of the most talked-about acts of their season, shaking the stage with a moment that rewrote the rules. Their bold sound, fearless energy, and breakout performance turned them into overnight stars, drawing attention from fans, critics, and even country music legends. Everything pointed to a powerful rise, until the spotlight began to fade. Appearances slowed, momentum shifted, and questions quietly surfaced. So, what really happened behind the scenes? Grab a seat as we uncover the truth. The night that changed everything, and what followed. They walked onto one of the biggest stages in America with no safety net, no record deal, and no guarantee that anyone in that room even knew their name. Chapel Hart, made up of sisters Danica and Devin Hart and their cousin Trea Swindle, had spent years building something from the ground up, far from the spotlight. Long before America's Got Talent came calling in 2022, their story had already been written across small towns and quiet nights. From Louisiana to Alabama, where they performed for modest crowds who had no idea they were watching a group on the edge of something much bigger. What made their rise feel almost accidental was how close it came to never happening. That same summer, their focus wasn't television or national fame. It was a planned tour with the Indigo Girls, a chance to grow steadily in the country and folk scene. But when the tour was suddenly canceled due to illness, everything shifted. A gap appeared where their plans used to be, and into that space stepped an opportunity they had already turned down more than once. An AGT producer, persistent and convinced, kept reaching out, even as the group hesitated. To them, talent competitions felt uncertain, even risky, especially for artists who had spent nearly a decade doing things their own way. Yet something changed. Maybe it was timing, maybe curiosity, or maybe the simple fact that doors don't always knock twice. They agreed to audition, stepping into a space that didn't quite feel like theirs, yet, instead of playing it safe, they made a bold choice. Their performance wasn't just a song, it was a statement. You Can Have Him, Jolene, inspired by Dolly Parton's 1973 classic, flipped a familiar story on its head. Rather than pleading or competing, it delivered a sharp, confident message. Why fight over the same man after all these years? The tone was playful, but the meaning cut deeper, and the audience felt it almost instantly. Before the performance even reached its final moments, the room had already shifted. The energy changed, rising from curiosity into something electric. What followed wasn't supposed to happen. Not at that stage of the competition, not under those rules. The golden buzzers had already been used. There was nothing left to give. And yet, in a moment that seemed to break the structure of the show itself, the judges came together. Terry Crews joined them. The crowd began to react, louder and louder, until the decision felt less like a choice and more like something inevitable.
You know, trust me, if I hadn't used my golden buzzer, I would give you a golden buzzer.
When the buzzer was pressed, it wasn't by one person, but all of them at once. Gold confetti fell as if the moment had been waiting years to happen, not just minutes. For Chapel Hart, it wasn't just validation. It was a sudden rewriting of everything they had been told about where they belonged in country music. The aftermath moved faster than anyone could have predicted. Within days, their names spread across social media, clips of their audition gathering millions of views. Dolly Parton herself acknowledged them, while artists like Tanya Tucker and Darius Rucker added their voices to the growing attention. From Poplarville, Mississippi, to New Orleans, their journey suddenly felt like it belonged to the entire world. But behind the sudden wave of attention and applause, something quieter had already started to unfold. Something you wouldn't catch in the highlights, the headlines, or the standing ovations, yet something powerful enough to slowly shift the path they had worked so hard to build. But before we go deeper into Chapel Hart's rapid rise to fame, let's take a step back and uncover the early struggles that shaped their journey. Stay with us. The story that built Chapel Hart. Long before the gold confetti, the viral clips, and the sudden recognition in 2022, Chapel Hart had already built a story that most people never saw. Their name didn't come from a marketing plan or a label meeting. It came from something much closer to home, a small community called Hart's Chapel and a family name that stretched across more than 100 relatives. In Poplarville, Mississippi, where they were raised, music wasn't something you chased. It was something you lived with. It filled church walls, echoed through family gatherings, and quietly shaped three young voices that would one day carry much farther than anyone expected. Danica Hart, born in 1987, carried a voice that felt rooted in old-school soul but shaped by country legends like Dolly Parton and the Chicks. Trea Swindle, born in 1985, leaned into storytelling, shaping lyrics that reflected real life rather than polished fantasy. Devin Hart, the youngest, born in 1993, brought structure and training, having studied music and tested her voice in competitions before the group fully came together. Together, they weren't just singers, they were a blend of instinct, discipline, and lived experience. But Chapel Hart didn't begin as Chapel Hart. In its earliest form, the group went by a different name, one that never quite captured who they were becoming. It wasn't until 2014, while living in New Orleans, that they redefined everything, choosing a name that tied their past to their purpose. From that moment, they weren't chasing trends. They were building identity. Still, identity alone didn't open doors. Between 2014 and the late 2010s, they moved through the southern United States almost unnoticed, performing in bars, fairs, and outdoor stages across Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. There were no major sponsors, no steady radio play, and no industry machine behind them. Everything they created, they funded themselves. Equipment was rented, studios were improvised, and every mile traveled came with a cost they had to figure out on their own. At one point, around 2018, the pressure nearly broke them. Money was tight, opportunities were limited, and the idea of continuing began to feel uncertain. Even then, they didn't shift their direction. While others adjusted to fit expectations, Chapel Hart stayed rooted in their message. Songs about everyday life, relationships, and the voices often overlooked in country music. Tracks like Made for Me and Jesus and Alcohol reflected that balance between tradition and something more current, even if they didn't immediately break through. What made their journey even more complicated was the space they were trying to enter. Country music had long been seen as a genre with a narrow image, and as a black female trio, they often found themselves facing quiet resistance. There were events they weren't invited to, stages they were overlooked for, and moments where it became clear they didn't match what some people expected country music to look like. Still, they kept going, choosing consistency over compromise. By 2020, something began to shift, not loudly, but enough to be noticed. Social media started doing what traditional platforms hadn't. Clips of their performances, behind-the-scenes moments, and live recordings began to circulate, slowly building an audience that felt connected to their story. There was a growing space of listeners, especially within the African-American country music community, who saw themselves reflected in Chapel Hart in a way that had been rare before. Around that same period, a turning point quietly emerged. A performance in Nashville caught the attention of producer Jeff Glicksman, who stepped in to help stabilize what had been a fragile operation. It didn't suddenly launch them into fame, but it gave them enough structure to keep moving forward. By 2021, recognition started to build in small but meaningful ways. CMT included them in its Next Women of Country program, placing them alongside artists who had gone on to reshape the genre in their own ways. Yet even then, one of their most defining songs had already been released, without much noise. You Can Have Him, Jolene, their bold response to a classic, existed long before a national audience ever heard it. It was out there, quietly sitting with the rest of their work, waiting. What changed in 2022 wasn't the music itself, it was the scale. The songs didn't suddenly become better, they simply reached people who hadn't been looking for them before. And behind that sudden rise was a decade of work, risk, rejection, and persistence that had already shaped who Chapel Hart was, long before the world finally started paying attention. Their rise had been building quietly for years. But what happens when that momentum explodes all at once? Watch closely. When the spotlight hit too fast. everything changed faster than anyone could process. One moment, they were still grinding through small venues across the Gulf South, and the next, their names were echoing across national stages, trending online, and filling conversations they weren't even in. That kind of leap, going from unknown to unforgettable in what felt like hours, looked like a dream from the outside. But inside it, the pace told a different story. By September 17, 2022, they were already standing on one of country music's most sacred stages, the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. Introduced by Jeannie Seeley, a legend celebrating over 5 decades with the Opry, Chapel Hart didn't just perform that night, they shook the room. 3 standing ovations followed, one after the other, as if the audience already knew this wasn't just another debut. Family members sat in the crowd, watching not just a performance, but the payoff of years that had gone unseen. It didn't feel like an industry moment. It felt personal, almost overdue. And then came the cosigns. Not quiet ones either. Loud, public, unmistakable support from names that defined the genre. Dolly Parton, Tanya Tucker, Marty Stewart, Gretchen Wilson. Even Darius Rucker pulled them into his world, featuring them on Old Church Hymn, released on September 30th, 2022. These weren't casual nods. They were signals, clear ones, that Chapel Hart had crossed into a space most artists spend years trying to reach. But here's the part that didn't trend. Just weeks after that Opry debut, at the very peak of their momentum, everything paused. In late October 2022, Danica Hart underwent vocal cord surgery. Suddenly, the voice that carried their sound went silent. No performances, no singing, just recovery. She didn't hide it. From her hospital bed, she shared the moment directly with fans, choosing honesty over polish.
America's Got Talent finalist Chapel Hart issued a health update on the trio's frontwoman, Danica Hart, who recently left the hospital after undergoing vocal cord surgery.
It was raw, unfiltered, and real. The kind of update that doesn't fit into highlight reels. While the world was still celebrating their rise, they were dealing with something much quieter, something that forced them to stop when everything around them said go. By December, she was back, slowly, carefully, but back. A show in Biloxi marked their return, followed by another appearance at the Grand Ole Opry just days later. And once they regained their footing, they didn't ease in. They accelerated. January 2023 brought Glory Days, a single co-written with Jim Beavers, and with it came their first headlining tour. Not a small run, not a test. A full-scale tour across more than 60 cities. New York, Atlanta, New Orleans, Nashville, and countless others in between. The jump from local stages to packed theaters wasn't gradual. It was immediate. But even as the venues grew, something else lingered beneath the surface. A gap between what people saw and what was actually happening behind it. Because, despite the applause, despite the headlines, despite the names backing them publicly, they were still operating without the kind of support system most would assume came with that level of exposure. No major safety net, no easy path, just momentum and the pressure to keep it alive. So what was really holding Chapel Hart together behind the success? Keep watching to find out. Success that didn't feel like winning. Long before the standing ovations and festival stages, there was a version of Chapel Hart that almost didn't make it. Back in 2018, the group stood dangerously close to breaking apart. Money was tight. Opportunities were uncertain. At one point, continuing didn't even seem practical. Devin Hart worked at a grocery store just to help keep things afloat, while the others pushed forward with whatever resources they could gather. Then came a small performance in Nashville, one of those moments that doesn't look like much at the time, but ends up changing everything. A producer noticed. A door opened, not wide, but enough. That history didn't disappear when success arrived. It followed them. So when October 2022 came around again, but this time with a different kind of shift, it carried weight. The group signed with Black River Entertainment, stepping into a more structured side of the industry. It looked like the missing piece. Access to better production, stronger distribution, and a clearer strategy. Their earlier work began to re-emerge with new life. The Girls Are Back in Town, originally released in 2021, found its way onto platforms like Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon Music in early 2023, this time polished and repositioned. Songs like Tailgate Trophy and I Will Follow began pulling in streams at a rate they hadn't seen before. Then came May 2023, when the album Glory Days dropped. It wasn't just another release. It felt like a statement. Tracks like Welcome to Fist City, inspired by a personal request from Loretta Lynn before her passing in October 2022, carried a sense of legacy and responsibility. Critics took notice. The sound was sharper, the message is clearer, the identity is more defined. On stage, they were electric. From CMA Fest to Stagecoach, from the Fox Theater in Atlanta to open-air festivals across the country, they delivered performances that felt alive, tight harmonies, real connection, and energy that didn't fade halfway through a set. But energy has limits. The tour stretched from mid-2023 into early 2024, covering more than 50 major cities. Night after night, the expectation remained the same: deliver, connect, impress, and for a while, they did, consistently, until it started to wear on them. In a 2024 interview, Danica admitted something most artists don't say out loud: that there were moments when stepping on stage no longer felt exciting. Not because they didn't love it, but because the pressure had grown too heavy. The need to meet expectations, to maintain momentum, to prove that they weren't just a viral moment, it all stacked up. There were other challenges too, ones that didn't show up in ticket sales or streaming numbers. As Black women in a genre rooted in tradition, they faced barriers that weren't always obvious but were always present. Certain markets hesitated. Some platforms expected adjustments, subtle changes to image, to tone, to how they presented themselves. It wasn't direct rejection, it was something harder to define. Even financially, the journey wasn't as smooth as it looked. Before everything changed, they had been funding much of their own work: recording, touring, production. That kind of start doesn't just fade away when success arrives. It shapes how you move, how you decide, how you protect what you've built. By early 2024, something shifted again, but this time, it wasn't loud. Fewer appearances, less visibility. The kind of absence that makes people start asking questions. But when Chapel Hart went quiet, what were they quietly preparing behind the scenes? Stay tuned. The plan to return to the stage. Before anything fractured, there was a moment when everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. Early 2025 didn't feel uncertain. It felt controlled, intentional, almost like the group had finally found the rhythm they had been chasing for years. The noise of the industry was still there, but they were no longer reacting to it. They were shaping their own direction. The first real signal came quietly in March 2025. A studio photo appeared on their official Instagram page, simple but deliberate. No long explanation, no dramatic announcement, just confirmation that a new album was nearly complete. Behind that short message sat something bigger, a project built around identity, community, and the kind of Southern storytelling that had carried them from small-town stages to national attention. It wasn't just another release. It felt like a statement of who they had become. That sense of growth had already started to show weeks earlier. On February 14, 2025, they released Perfect for Me, a softer, more intimate track that leaned into vulnerability rather than power. It was a shift, subtle but noticeable. Within 2 weeks, the music video crossed 1 million views, fueled not by heavy promotion, but by a fan base that had stayed with them through every stage of their journey. But what made this period stand out wasn't just the music. It was how everything seemed to be moving at once without falling apart. They were still performing regularly across Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, showing up in the same communities that had supported them from the beginning. Those shows remained close, personal, and grounded, even as their reach continued to expand. At the same time, larger stages were opening up. Their appearance at the ACM Awards in early 2025 carried a different kind of confidence. It didn't feel like a breakthrough moment anymore. It felt like confirmation. They weren't trying to prove they belonged. They were already there. Behind the scenes, there were also quiet shifts taking place. Individual ideas were beginning to form. Writing projects, collaborations, long-term plans that stretched beyond the group itself. None of it seemed disruptive. If anything, it looked like natural evolution, the kind that happens when artists grow into themselves. From the outside, everything pointed forward. The music was connecting. The audience was growing. The opportunities were expanding. It looked stable. It looked sustainable. And that's what made what came next so difficult to see coming. Keep watching. What really happened? The fallout. No one saw it coming, not like this. The first crack didn't appear on a stage or in a performance. It showed up quietly, online, on July 2nd, 2025. A single post. No build-up, no warning. Just words that immediately felt heavier than anything the group had ever shared before. Danica Hart wrote that she had stayed silent for months, trying to hold things together, but she had reached a point where she couldn't anymore. At first, people read it twice, trying to make sense of it. Then, the details settled in. She described tension behind the scenes that had gone far beyond creative disagreements. She spoke about feeling unsafe, unsupported, and pushed to a breaking point. The kind of language that didn't sound like frustration, it sounded final. For fans who had followed their journey from the beginning, it was hard to reconcile. This was a group that had always presented unity, not just professionally, but personally, family. That had been the foundation. Then came the part that shifted everything. According to her post, she had received a message the night before. An ultimatum: sign a document prepared by management before midnight, or the group would continue without her. The name she helped build would move forward, just without her in it. It didn't read like a negotiation. It read like pressure with a deadline. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, the post spread across social media, pulling in fans who had watched the group grow from small-town performances to national stages. Shock turned into confusion, and confusion quickly turned into anger. People began picking sides without knowing the full story, and that's when things escalated. Messages, comments, and direct attacks started circulating, many of them aimed at the other members. What had begun as a personal statement was now turning into a public storm, moving faster than anyone involved could control. 5 days later, on July 7th, Danica returned online. This time, the tone had shifted. She asked her supporters to stop sending threats, urging them not to turn the situation into something even more damaging. It was a moment that suggested things had already gone further than she intended. Then, just 3 days after that, everything changed again. On July 10th, the original post disappeared. In its place came a new message, an apology, carefully worded, stating that the group would continue and honor their remaining commitments. To an outside observer, it looked like a resolution, like the storm had passed. But the silence that followed told a different story. For nearly 2 months, there was almost nothing. No updates, no behind-the-scenes glimpses, no signs of the usual connection they maintained with their audience. The energy that had defined them earlier in the year seemed to vanish without explanation. Then, on August 25th, 2025, all 3 members posted the same message at the same time. It was calm, thoughtful, carefully constructed. They spoke about shared memories, about growth, about entering new seasons of life. The word used was hiatus, not breakup. But buried inside that message was the truth that changed everything. Danica would be moving forward on her own, while the remaining 2 would continue under a new name. But when Danica chose her own path, what did that really mean for Chapel Hart's future? Don't miss what comes next. 3 roads forward. The story didn't end when the silence settled. It divided. What once moved as a single unit began to separate into 3 distinct paths, each carrying pieces of what had been built over more than a decade. There was no dramatic announcement beyond that final joint statement in August 2025, but the direction became clear almost immediately after. Devin Hart and Treya Swindle moved first. Within weeks, new social media pages appeared under a different name, Magnolia Rising. The tone was subtle but intentional. Their first messages spoke about endurance, about walking through fire and coming out stronger. It wasn't confrontational, but it wasn't vague either. It hinted at a struggle without reopening wounds. By November 2025, they had already released their debut single, Hit the Ground, followed closely by another track titled Dream Running. The sound was noticeably different, heavier, more grounded in a rock-leaning outlaw country style. It wasn't a departure from their roots, but it was an energy shift, something sharper, more direct. And while they were starting over in name, they weren't starting from zero. Years of touring, connections, and a loyal fan base didn't disappear overnight. Collaborations began to take shape, including early songwriting work with established industry names.
They're touring around in the first part of 2024, including a couple of dates at the O2 Arena in London, one of the biggest indoor venues in all of Europe, where country music is not held in anywhere near the same regard as the US. So that's a massive achievement for them.
The foundation they had built as part of a group was now being repurposed into something new. Danica's path unfolded differently. Her first major step came on November 27, 2025. Thanksgiving Day. Instead of a bold reintroduction, she chose something quieter. A song titled Amazing Grace, not a direct cover, but a personal interpretation layered with her own story. It felt less like a release and more like a statement, reflective, emotional, and deeply rooted in what she had just come through. Before that, she had already begun reconnecting with audiences in a more personal way. Through a series of small, intimate performances known as the Open Hart sessions, she stepped away from large stages and into closer spaces. These shows weren't just about music, they were about storytelling. She spoke about the songs, the experiences behind them, and the moments that shaped them. The response, especially in Mississippi, was immediate and personal. Crowds showed up not just to listen, but to support. By January 30th, 2026, she officially launched her solo tour at Ground Zero Blues Club in Biloxi, a place tied to earlier chapters of her career. A full album was already in progress, with a release planned later in the year. She described it in simple terms: honest, rooted, and personal. What stood out most wasn't just the music. It was what none of them was doing. No detailed interviews, no public breakdown of the events in July. No direct responses to the accusations, the tension, or the unanswered questions that still lingered. Each side moved forward, but carefully, choosing silence over explanation. Even in small statements, there were hints of restraint. At one point, there was mention of possibly sharing space again digitally, allowing both paths to exist side by side under the legacy they once built together. Whether that was genuine, strategic, or simply respectful distance remained unclear. What was clear was this: 3 directions had emerged from one story, and each was still carrying the weight of what came before. But that raises a bigger question. What future is Chapel Hart really building from these 3 separate paths? Stay with us. A journey that never ends. The journey didn't stop, it shifted direction. In recent conversations, the group made it clear that their focus is no longer just on maintaining momentum, but on defining what comes next. One of their most ambitious goals is to win a Grammy in the country category within the next 5 years. But even that isn't the full picture of what they're building. At the same time, they've been developing plans for something closer to home: a music academy in Poplarville. The idea isn't just about training performers, it's about creating access. A place where young talents from smaller communities can learn, grow, and understand the deeper roots of country music without having to leave everything behind to be taken seriously. That vision says a lot about how they see their role now. Because even without reaching the commercial peak of some of their peers, they've secured something that's harder to define but impossible to ignore: a clear identity. In a genre that has often been seen as narrow in both sound and representation, they've managed to hold their place as one of the few long-standing and visible Black female groups in country music. And that presence has had an effect, not through disruption, but through consistency. By holding on to traditional storytelling while weaving in themes of empowerment, independence, and community, they've created a sound that feels both familiar and new. It's a balance that hasn't gone unnoticed. Industry voices, from major platforms to respected critics, have pointed to their work as part of a quiet shift happening inside modern country music. Some have even described it as a kind of soft revolution. Not something loud or forced, but something steady that reshapes expectations over time. Of course, not everyone has embraced that change easily. There have been ongoing conversations about their blending of styles, especially the influence of pop and R&B elements in their music. For some listeners, that raises questions about where the line should be drawn, but their response has remained consistent. They don't argue. They don't push back directly. Instead, they let the music speak, using each release to reflect real-life experiences rather than trying to fit into a fixed idea of what country music should be. That approach has helped them maintain a loyal audience, one that continues to grow beyond their original base in the southern United States. By 2025, that reach had already started to extend internationally, with their appearance at the Keep It Country Festival in the United Kingdom marking a new level of recognition. It wasn't just another performance, it was a signal that their influence was moving beyond borders. And through all of it, the direction remains clear. Not just building a career, but building something that lasts. So, what do you think really happened to Chapel Hart behind the scenes? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.